Thank you for being here. As you know, this is going to be all about storytelling and its connection to creating connection, which I think is a really beautiful gateway for all the good things that can come when we connect one-on-one with people, which is how I like to approach storytelling, no matter how big or small my audience is. So I'm going to try and figure out this platform. Yay, so far so good. This is our very simple agenda today, and it is to, help us cover three aspects of the storytelling, which falls mostly, I think, into the final pie wedge at the bottom there. When I first started it, I would have, as an editor, I would have wanted to come here and just skip right to that part. But I actually think that that is the third stage of being able to create connection. I want to walk us through some ideas that I've come across from really smart people that I use in my work as a brand storytelling advisor. And they actually relate to creating a really solid foundation for that communication, which is, creating value to begin with, and then delivering value and thinking in, I think, interesting ways about how we can do that, so that when it comes to the communication piece, we've got ourselves in a really good, clear, focused place. So a couple of housekeeping things. Number one, I have had a couple of concussions in the last 5 years. So my memory is not what it used to be. And so you're going to see me looking over at my laptop here because I've made a couple of notes here. I just don't want to forget anything that I think is really relevant and valuable. So I'm not looking on Facebook. I'm actually looking at the notes of my presentation. So thank you for your understanding. I want to start by inviting you to play a little game as we go through today. I used to work with a mentor that started every meeting by saying, I want you to write down, take 20 seconds to jot down one thing that you'd like to walk away from today's meeting with. And the reason she recommended that is that the reticular activating system, which is basically the bouncer of your brain, has this way of being able to let in those things that we're specifically or, sort of consciously looking for and listening for. So take a moment to do that. One of the questions I wrote down when I didn't have anything super specific in mind would be, what do I need to hear today to, make progress on X goal or X challenge I'm facing? So I'd just love to invite you to do that and see how you do through the rest of the presentation. See if you actually come away with something that you came to get. And I hope that you do. And if not, we can blame my mentor. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay. Another bit of housekeeping. Because I started in magazines and my heart lies with, talking about readers, because I was always on the editorial side. I know this is a mixed group of people, and I now see, even if I were to be back in the business of magazines today, I would be very much wearing my business hat as well as my editorial hat. So when I talk today about audiences or clients, I'm using those terms to refer to, whoever it is you are providing something to and hoping for support in return, whether that's your readers, your advertisers, people buying tickets to events, so attendees, sponsors, donors, prospects. So rather than repeating that long list every time, I'm just going to talk about audiences or clients. So I just wanted to clarify that. Same thing with products and services. I'm going to use that shorthand to mean whatever people can get from you. Again, whether it's a ticket to an event, a newsletter, a sponsorship, a tax receipt, a magazine. And then finally, as I think I mentioned quickly on my little intro, I'm sharing ideas, none of which are mine. There is just an absolute gold mine of helpful intel that I've come across in my desire to, be a lifelong learner or nerd, however you want to see yourself. I've always seen myself as a giant nerd, and with an insatiable curiosity. Journalism was the first pass that I got to be able to do that for a living and be allowed to indulge those things. So now I just do it in different ways. So today I'm sharing smart people's ideas and my ways of using them, with hopes that I can, give you some smart ways of using them too. And then, yeah, I think that's it. We're going to start with stage one, which is creating value. So let's get started. Okay. So whenever I was, looking looking at thought leaders' ideas on content strategy, excuse me, I would often hear them say, create value. And I found it became such a repeated term that it started to trigger me, because I felt like it actually didn't say anything. It was very overused and extremely vague. But instead of getting super judgy, I decided to get curious instead and say, okay, so what could we possibly, how could we make that term actually meaningful to people? And the most basic way that I like to see that as step one in any successful brand is make things that people want and need. You're going to have a much easier time when it gets to the communication piece if you're starting from a point where it's something people want, something people need. So I'm probably going to say a few things that are going to seem obvious to you today. That is absolutely obvious, sometimes only in hindsight to me, because I've worked with a lot of brands that are wondering why they're struggling to communicate. And it's often because they haven't created something that people actually want or need. So, okay, so on the topic of creating value, the first rabbit hole that I fell into, that I want to invite you into with me, is this concept called jobs to be done theory. So, if we go back to that idea of creating things people want as the starting point for a successful brand, I like to use this framework to connect the dots between something that people, something that your audiences want, as well as what the company wants to sell. So if you take a look at the right-hand side of this illustration, it has a little subtitle that says customer jobs, and there's a little checklist. So that's what we're talking about. I want to start there by thinking about, like, what is the progress? Jobs to be done is another way of saying, what's the progress that somebody wants to make on a specific task or a specific circumstance? This is what we think of as jobs to be done. This is an academic theory that has been, tested by academics in business schools, specifically related to marketing. And I found this framework really helpful. I use it when I'm helping companies, especially with the copywriting for their website. So what I like about it is, back when I was at Chatelaine, we had this consumer insights department that had this massive budget. Didn't realize how big it was at the time, because I was, relatively young and inexperienced. But in hindsight, I realized they had an extremely rich budget for doing customer research. What I like about this framework is it doesn't depend on having somebody, a huge budget or a big research department. It really gets at, like, what are the causal drivers that motivate people, and what are the things that they're actually trying to accomplish behind the purchase. So what you're trying to do here is connect those jobs to be done that your customer has to the thing that you are actually selling. Again, it might sound super obvious, but what is interesting to me is that sometimes those jobs to be done are really small, like, I'm buying this thing to pass the time. Sometimes they're big. I'm using this platform to try and find a better job. But what we do is we essentially hire a product to help us do the job. If it does the job well, we'll keep going back to it. And if it does a crummy job, we'll fire it and look for something else to solve the problem. And what I find so interesting is all the nuances that are wrapped up in what seem like sometimes very obvious jobs. So what I'm going to do is give you, since this is about storytelling, I'm going to tell a story that I read about a developer. They had created this condo where they were targeting it in a neighborhood where a lot of, they realized they did have some research dollars. They knew that this was a postal code area where people were going to be downsizing from the big family home. So they did all kinds of very focus group driven design decisions and changes, created this condo that was going to help people who were either divorcing or, again, downsizing for, a couple moving into a smaller place after if the kids move out or they just want to have a smaller place. So what happened was they got a few people who were in the door, but they had way more tire kickers, people who were interested, showing up to the model suite and saying positive things, but not actually signing on the dotted line. They hired a consultant to try and get to the bottom of this. And the consultant did a bunch of interviews with people who had signed on. They had signed a contract, and they were ready to, waiting for the place to be built and ready to move in. What happened was they discovered that there was this one common thread. And one of the things the consultant asked was, what was it that, why did you make the decision to move in? And they said, well, I signed the paperwork as soon as I figured out what to do with the dining room table. And the consultant was wondering, like, oh, here we've been wondering about, like, is it supposed to be that people want bay windows? Is it a different breakfast bar counter? Like, what's the holdup here? And he realized it was actually that they were not comparing this condo against other condos. That wasn't the competition. The competition was actually doing nothing. The competition was, I am going to stay in my house because I can't figure out how to detach myself from all my things that are really meaningful to me. And these were not valuable tables. Like, he would look at the dining room table where he was having the sort of conversation with them, and he would see basically a not valuable in a sort of monetary sense hunk of wood. But the sentimental value of people being able to part with things that have, been with them for a long time and hold a lot of memory and emotion for them, that was the problem. Once he understood this, went back to the drawing board, completely changed how they were talking about the condo and changed the services they were offering. So the job to be done, they offered things like consultations on moving help. They offered 2 years of free storage so that they could put all of the belongings that they hadn't found a home for yet. And then they could allow people some of that, like, emotional space to be able to sit back, move into the new place, and not have to face all of the what they deemed to be really heavy decisions about what to do about things they cared about. So that's what I mean, where I find the jobs to be done framework so interesting, is because we can look at it from a very obvious surface level, but we can also understand that there's all kinds of other nuanced ways, subtleties that show up in how people actually think of the job to be done. So I want to come back to this map here. What this framework helps me when I'm getting to know a company, a brand, we use this to make a list of what they perceive their customers' jobs to be from various angles. And then they also get into explaining to me what are the pains that customer is experiencing underneath, like, why do they even have to do the job in the first place? What's not going well for them? What are the frustrations? I also like to add, this isn't on the framework, but a bonus tip, if you will. I find sometimes people are good at describing the symptoms of the problems they're experiencing. So they don't really know the cause of the problem, but they know what the symptom is. The analogy I like to use, or it's actually not an analogy, the example I like to use is, let's say you have a pain in the back of your leg, you go to see your physio or maybe your chiropractor, and you say, I've got this pain in the back of my leg. They say, the specialist says, oh, that's sciatica. Well, you wouldn't necessarily know, unless you were really informed about body issues, that sciatica was the pain you were experiencing. All you know is you've got this irritation and this shooting pain going down your leg. So that's why I think it's good to separate pains into two columns, like, What do they know? They can probably name the problem in some cases, but what if they don't know the name of the problem or the cause of it? Well, how would they describe it? And then gains, like what is it they're looking for? Like what's the ultimate way they want this to be solved? And then you can see how those little lists on the right correspond with the lists on the left. Like how does your company relieve the pains that you've just identified? What are you've discovered their aspirations. How does your product create the wins that people are looking for? Like what are they specifically looking for from a very functional, obvious standpoint, as well as from a more nuanced, emotional, social, other standpoints. And then you have your list of how the customer jobs relate directly to the products or services, or in this case, magazines, events that you create. So that's my little pitch for the jobs to be done framework. Anybody have anything coming up for them? When you think about this idea, can you see where you might apply this to something that you are creating, one of the services or products? Or to me, this could even apply to the concept of reverse engineering the content for an issue. When I was at Chatelaine, we used to have, I remember we once planned a holiday issue by imagining like, okay, 6 months away from now, because we always used to plan so far in advance, what would be the dream issue that our reader would want? Like, let's just make up some cover lines and then try to figure out if we can create stories to match those dreamy cover lines. That's one way that I could see using a framework like this to get really clear on what it is people are trying to accomplish. So next, we're going to move on to how do we deliver value? What does that mean? For this, I love to think about a very specific framework that I, again, fell into a really helpful rabbit hole called the elements of value. And what that does is it allows us to think about, with a nice, helpful map in front of us, what are the elements that people most care about in terms of what their products and services actually deliver. So for this, I'm going to use the credit to the good people at Bain & Company, which is one of those high-ticket consulting groups. What you're looking at here is they studied, so they've been helping companies for a long time. A couple of their consultants did research over a 30-year time period, and they wanted to determine like what consumers want. I'm going to pause there and say there's a B2B version of this coming in the next slide. So just take a moment to sit with this one for the B2C people on the call, and then we'll get to the B2B one. So what they wanted to do was to identify what are the subjective and objective criteria that motivate people to buy. Like, what is it they're actually appreciating about those products? So when they did those studies, they realized that the brands that deliver on multiple layers of value have more long-term profitability, better brand equity, better customer loyalty, all the good things you want in a brand. So I'd love to take a moment to sort of walk through this with you so we have a general understanding of what this is. And this is available, just Google Bain & Company, B2B or B2C elements of value, and you'll see tons of illustrations of this. So as I mentioned, they broke the criteria into 4 different tiers, and each one represents a different category. So at the bottom, you've got your very functional elements. So if you think about the job they want to get done, some of the things they're expecting that they value from whatever product they hire to get them that job done are very functional. Like, it's something that saves them time, or it saves them money, or it's pretty, it has some sensory appeal, or it satisfies their need for variety, it helps them stay organized, it reduces risk. So there's a whole lot of functional elements at the bottom. I mean, you look at so many of I think back to, Chatelaine, today's parent, another one. the number of cover lines that we would have had that really satisfy a parent's need to save time, avoid hassle, reduce effort, stay organized, sort of nonstop. So there's a lot of value in staying at the functional level. However, once you rise up in the pyramid to the emotional, life-changing, and social impact levels, that's where you get into that deeper emotional connection that people can have to a brand. You know, if it just saves you money, there's probably another product that also does exactly the same thing. So where your value, your customers' appreciation of your value increases is where you can also tick off some of the boxes on these other tiers. I'm going to step back and say, this is not a bingo card where you're supposed to be able to, you know, cover every single one of the elements on this pyramid. The idea is to become really clear on the elements that you do deliver extremely well on, and then to focus your efforts on continuing to deliver those elements well, and to communicate well about those elements so people understand really clearly what sets you apart in a way that they also appreciate. So I use this all the time to help brands clarify their messaging. I do some advisory work for the Dobson Center at McGill University, and they have all kinds of startup programs and accelerator programs. So often, you know, bless their hearts, these are students who are coming, they're like in school, some of them, they're also trying to run businesses. So they're doing the best they can with the, you know, time and business experience they have. And when I show this to them, it just sort of, they sit back in their chair and go, oh my God, like, wow, I never realized I could understand, like there's so many things swirling around in my head. This helps me organize my thoughts around something that people actually care about. So I find it's really helpful for that, shining a light on, you know, what is it people care about. So I think this is a really valuable way for you to think about your brand, whether you're on the, you know, the creation of the magazine side, whether you're talking to prospects, to think about like what exactly, maybe you only have 3 or 4 or 5. That's a ton. That's great. You're not looking to have 10 or 12. It just ends up diluting the message. But clarify which are the ones that you really want to double down on, and play around and see what happens. If you decide that it's not really making the impact that you want, and there's one that you parked, you know, sort of on the back burner, you want to try adding that into the mix and testing. That's really the only way to find out. Like, there's going to be, unless you do have this 7-figure research department, and you can ask your audience what they most appreciate and really feel that you can trust their answers. The way to figure this stuff out is to actually just put it out there and see what happens, and keep testing and keep learning from the results that you're getting. So the next one is the B2B version. So they divide this one. This is actually even more elements. It's there are 40 different aspects of this on this pyramid. So at the bottom, they call that table stakes. Like, you're not even in the game if you don't, unless you come to the table with those basic boxes ticked. So you're not necessarily going to focus on that as the most important part of your messaging, because there's a extremely good likelihood that every one of your competitors also offers those. So I would make sure that people understand, especially if it's something to do with regulatory compliance, that they understand that you do, you know, your product meets specifications, and there's, you know, you're adhering to whatever the regulations are. But I would explore the other elements that are higher up on the pyramid. So functional value, you know, it helps you improve your top line, helps your business customer reduce their costs. They know they can count on the product quality. It offers them opportunities for innovation. Then the, you know, ease of doing business value. I love how they broke that down, and there's like at least a dozen ways that you can slice and dice that concept of, we'll make it easier for you to do business. So I think one thing I always preach in when I'm talking to companies about their messaging is the value of being specific over being vague. The vague feels very safe because it's hard to get people to disagree with you when you're talking at a very abstract, general, broad level. But where you're going to lose the opportunity to connect is by not being more specific, not taking a stand, not being super clear and particular about, well, how exactly do you help it make it easier for me to do business? So I hope that this offers you a few more ideas on how you can, take a deep breath and get a little courageous and spell that out for people so that they can actually understand and know. And then there's also the individual value, which I think we sometimes lose sight of when we say I'm in, it's B2B. You're not actually selling to a business. You're selling to another person who works at a business. So thinking about them as an individual and how they gain from expanding their network or, reduced anxiety, gosh, couldn't be a more apt sort of valuable element than reduced anxiety, given everything that's been going on in the world for the past few years. Growth and development is another big one. And then the highest level of the pyramid is sort of providing those really intangible, beautiful elements like a sense of vision, optimism, making a social impact. So those are two of my very favorite go-to frameworks for helping people really understand more about, like, what does value actually mean when it comes to delivering it. I think that also applies to creating value too. So my next little tool comes from one of my new favorite books. It's right here on my desk. April Dunford is an absolute genius at something super unsexy sounding, which is positioning. But we're going to talk in a minute about why positioning is really important. One of the, there's a lot of people who will say, yeah, we got to get our positioning right. And she has specialized in positioning for software as a service companies for many years. Like, I can't think of anything I would be worse at than helping position tech companies, but that's an aside. I salute her. So what she did was write the Bible on this topic. What I've been doing is using it for my brands that have nothing to do with selling software as a service. So it's very transferable. So there's my little pitch for this book. And the whole book walks you through her process for being able to position your company or your product, service, magazine, event in the right context for the right people. And part of that process involves creating this really handy chart that I find is helpful at helping people really understand the connection between this feature thing that you're telling me about, that your company offers, and the benefit of that feature, and then the value to the business or the customer. So that's sort of me backing into and trying to put a positive spin on one thing I think companies get wrong a lot. So I want to help you avoid this mistake, is making assumptions about that people can totally get why this thing is so great for them. So this is a little, plea to maybe not make assumptions, because I think you're missing out on opportunities for people to actually connect. So this chart, there's probably some people on this call that can do this in their head, like those who are good at mental math, but I find business owners are not great at doing this because they know so much. They're, again, like those startup founders I talked about at McGill. Their heads are swirling with 1,000,001 things about their company, their brand, its history. A ton of them are completely irrelevant. But there are some aspects that are extremely relevant, and they're really going to help that customer make a good decision. So what I love about this simple framework is it helps you, fill that gap between what you created and why the customer is really going to gain from it. So I'll just walk through the feature benefit, which again might sound super obvious, but I just think there's a bit of a nuance that I wanted to highlight in how the value column is different, because most people stop at features and benefits. So I'd invite you to think about going one step further into spelling out what the value is. You could, if you were one of those good mental math people, start with the feature and go straight to value. Most of us, myself included, after my injuries, I need to spell it all out for myself. So if we look at the feature, this refers to like some capability that your product does or has. So thinking about the iPod, this is the first one, is an example from Apple. So when it first came out, they were touting the feature of it was it had 5 gigabytes of storage. And so the benefit of that is you can store up to 1,000 songs. But where they really nailed the value is in saying, so you can carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. So, I looked at another example from April's book, which was like the feature is one-click reports. And the benefit is, well, you can very quickly and easily generate those reports. But connecting the dots to that one extra step to say, so your organization can make decisions based on accurate, up-to-date metrics, that's not necessarily something I need in my work life. Maybe you don't need that in your work life, but for companies that were interested in this software as a service that she was helping position, that would make a huge difference. So, stopping at fast, easy report generation isn't necessarily enough. I also think this next one is a great example. 24-hour support. Okay, obvious, right? The help desk never shuts down. But for global organizations, that makes a big difference, knowing that they can have access to help, across every time zone, no matter where their offices are located. So that's just my invitation to you is to really dissect if you're talking about a newsletter as an opportunity for advertisers to support, or trying to invite sponsors to help you present an event or something like that. Don't stop with features and benefits. Go straight to the value. And if they need to understand the feature itself, then include that, absolutely. But really the ultimate thing that I want people to take away from this one is like the column under value is what people are most interested in. Just a funny little sidebar. You'll see that all of the points there start with the words "so you can." That's the way that I simplify. Like the leap from feature to value is, we made this thing with 5 gigs of storage, so you can what? We give you the ability to do one-click reports, so you can what? We did a project last year for Chartwell. They were relaunching to try and achieve all kinds of goals. They hired my agency to do copywriting for their websites. We did 55 locations in a record amount of time. The words we used most often were "so you can," so that we could help tell the story of all of these features that they thought were so important about their retirement residences. And we wanted to make sure that those features landed with the prospects who were trying to evaluate, like, what am I going to get from this one? Why do I care about that menu thing you're talking about? So yes, so you can, 3 magic words in storytelling. Okay, so next, again, April Dunford's book. The positioning conversation, I think, is really important to have in the context of when suddenly your brain was doing fine and then you're noticing it's maybe not doing as fine. She tells a great story in the book where a bakery has been doing just great on this street for many years. The neighborhood starts to change. A gym opens up on the next block. Then a coffee shop goes up, down the road. The owner's not concerned. She's been selling her, healthy, seedy nutty breakfast muffins for years to office workers who want a healthy alternative to donuts and pastries, which she also offers. Then she notices that business starts to slow down. She's making the same amount of muffins, but they're not moving as much. So she goes to the bakery down the street and discovers that they have muffins that look exactly like her muffins. And the whole, picks up the packaging, the ingredients list is almost identical. except that they are positioning their muffins as gluten-free paleo snacks, which is really appealing to all the buff health nuts that are coming from the gym, and the very health conscious parents that are in the neighborhood as they're walking their kids out for during the day. So change is the only constant in life. If there are trends that are changing, reflecting people's changing desires and needs out in the world, it could be a chance for you to look at whether the way you originally positioned your product is still the way you ought to be positioning your product. And, if you need help with that, I can't say enough about April's book for walking you step by step through that process. So this just felt like a really clear, easy example to show how you sometimes need to rethink the positioning, which then translates into messaging, even if you're delivering exactly the same thing you always have. Okay, so last but certainly not least is the part where we talk about communicating value, which is using storytelling as a way to, number one, connect with people, capture their attention, then connect with them emotionally once you have their interest, and then to influence them to take some kind of action. So another of my favorite resources is shown on this slide. It's called Stories That Stick by Kindra Hall. I love how she thinks about, and talks about storytelling in like 4 different main, like a wardrobe of stories. She says there are 4 of them. One of them is the value story. We're going to talk about that one today because I think it's most relevant to the people working in magazines. But this quote kind of says it all for me. People don't buy the thing, they buy what the thing will do for them. In order for them to do that, you have to tell them a story. So we're going to get into that. And I think that, we started by talking about caring about what people want and need. And now we're going to help sort of slice into those, like, well, what are those things they want and need? Now we're going to get into how do we do that? How do we put that into practice? So I also see storytelling as a way of practicing empathy. And that's my own personal approach. I also don't sell, insurance or security systems for a living. So I know those are very fear-based storytelling methods. All of the clients we work for are doing something good for people and for the planet. So it makes it really easy for us to, leverage empathy and compassion in order to connect with people. But I think that this philosophy helps put me in a place of wanting to, understand others and help them based on that understanding. Back when I was starting in magazines, and if someone said, okay, we need a story on X, I would have thought about that from my own, like, oh, how am I going to do this? Or like, I've got 25 other things to do. I would be looking at it from like, how is this going to help me? How can I, sorry, I'm not expressing here's what I have to do. Like, this is on my list. Whereas thinking about storytelling as an act of empathy is thinking about, like, how can I help this person? How can I help them with what they're doing? Because I know that when I help people, it always feels good. So that perspective shift has really helped me. And it has helped my clients as well. Think about their marketing as a service, as opposed to, instead of trying to get something, it's a way of trying to give something. So I was going to say, yes, this is one of the main, I would say the number one challenge, mistake I see companies making is in telling stories about themselves. So by that, I mean, their website is all about what they sell and about their company and about their products or their services. And what I'd like to invite you to do, if you're not already doing this in your communications, is to think of all of your communications as putting the audience at the center of the story. So they're the hero of your website, your press release, your newsletter, not your company. It's a I feel that that is a misunderstood way of communicating with people. Like, obviously, they want to find out about your company, or they wouldn't be coming to your website. But the difference is, instead of talking about all the things you sell, this storytelling that I practice tells people all the things that are that they're experiencing and that they need help with, and then your products and services are part of the message, but the focus is not primarily on the products and services. Um, so really the story is about the reader, and obviously I think all the editors on here are probably looking, going like, wow, that's the dumbest thing she said all day. It's so obvious, because your cover lines aren't going to say, the cover lines are going to say, potty train your 2-year-old in 1 week or less, or whatever. I'm using potty training was a common topic when I worked at Today's Parent. You're not going to say, we have all the answers to potty training you could ever ask for. It's really such a simple switch, is like rewriting sentences to say you instead of we, or so yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe you can grill me on that in the questions part. So I just wanted to, some of the audiences that I'm speaking with are not necessarily sold on the idea of storytelling. And I want to make it clear, it's not my opinion that this is a good idea. I'm just really following the herd. There's so many brands that are already using storytelling very successfully. And here's a few more people, including Queen Oprah, who has made a pretty decent living sharing 37,000 stories and selling them on the Oprah Winfrey Show back when it was on. So I have a few stats here. I'm just I think I might skip this slide only because I have a few more to share and I want to leave time for questions. But there is science behind why storytelling works. That's what this slide is telling you. Reach out to me if you're interested in that. It's definitely useful, especially if you're trying to sell any of your business clients on why they should be using storytelling. If you might sell, media services or something, creative services to them. Here's another one that says, like, the reason storytelling works based on is because it taps into emotion instead of logic. And I know we all think we're super rational, logical, we're in business, but the reality is we actually 90 to 95% of our purchase decisions are controlled by our feelings. So storytelling speaks directly to that part of our brain that is responsible for feelings. So here's an example of what I talked about a minute ago, confusingly, which was the idea of talking about your brand and your products versus putting the focus on your customer. So, Converse on the left, here's a whole bunch of information about its shoes. Here's some nice pictures of its products, different sizes, color combos, all the description there talks more about its products. And then there's the Nike approach, which is all about putting the customer as the hero, the audience as the hero. The punchline of this story, of course, is Converse was way ahead in market share when Nike came onto the scene, and Nike ended up swallowing the company whole. So here, this is what I wanted to talk about, which is the value story framework, which is one of Kendra Hall's frameworks that I find really helpful. So it's simple. It's like, what is the status quo? What's the issue? What's wrong with the way things are? Then disruption happens, which is when your thing comes to the rescue. Your product, your service, your story changes the status quo for that audience. And then there's the new normal, which is the aspirational side of things. That first little graphic where we had the jobs to be done, the aspirations, the gains, the gain givers. That's where you want to talk about that. What's the transformation? What's the outcome? What's the sort of how they're better off? And the key ingredients that Kendra Hall talks about in storytelling are these four at the bottom. The relatable character, which is your reader or your audience. Real emotion. What are they going through? Hold a mirror up to them. I don't like to think of pain points as something we push so much as something we hold a mirror up to acknowledge and reflect. I don't think anyone needs to feel worse about whatever problem that they have that is bringing them to us. I think what they want to feel is seen and acknowledged, that they do have some real concerns. And my experience has been, whenever you can get really specific about what those concerns and emotions are that they're going through, it actually helps build trust that you know exactly how to help them, because how else would you be in their head being able to read exactly how they've been feeling about this? The other ingredient that she talks about is a specific moment. Like, what is the moment where something happens, everything changes? Maybe it's the trigger moment that helps, where the person actually goes out and tries to get something done, usually it's a precipitating something. It's like the rise in the action. And then telling details that, again, comes down to specifics. Something that says, you must really know this audience well, or you would not have known that they would be ordering pizza at, every 6 because they're working late, magazine production. Or, they're a traveling salesman, so they've got their pen pack on their desk is filled with hotel pens that they've picked up from all of the traveling that they do. So that's what she means by telling details. I'll just share a lovely little story that she shares in the book. It's 100 words, so super short, by Warby Parker, which is the glasses company. They, buy a pair, give a pair is their model. It said, once upon a time, a young man left his glasses on an airplane. He tried to buy new glasses, but new glasses were expensive. Why is it so hard to buy stylish glasses without spending a fortune on them? He wondered. He returned to school and told his friends. We should start a company to sell amazing glasses for non-insane prices, said one. We should make shopping for glasses fun, said another. We should distribute a pair of glasses to someone in need for every pair sold, said a third. Eureka, Warby Parker was born. So that sort of shows in a nutshell that framework and those ingredients all together. I'm conscious of the time. This is the last slide I will share with you, which is my very non-scientific assessment of where engagement comes from. And of course, storytelling, I find, because of that, the emotional connection, because of the scientific reasons for that, once you have their attention with a story, you can capture their interest, use something relatable and relevant to them to again, keep the emotions flowing for them, and then give them something valuable and meaningful to them. Reflect their priorities, which we've just discussed in a few of these frameworks. How do you even know what those priorities are? So that is it. I'm going to skip that and go there. That's all for me, and I'd love to hear your questions.
And I'm back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really like how you use storytelling to teach us how storytelling can help us relate to our audiences better. I do. Very effective. That was a great presentation, and I really enjoy these kinds of presentations that take us a little bit out of like the way we typically approach the assets we have, if you want to call that the intelligence, the IP that we know about our brands and about the way we work, and shift into another thing. So we really appreciate you helping us shift into kind of a marketing mindset on this.
Yeah.
I'm going to encourage people to throw questions up in the comments here. One question that probably is on the minds of our audience right now is, okay, so that's a lot of data, and I love the way that we can now put all the things that we want to know and think we know about our audiences into different categories. What are some of the great ways of getting at that data? Like, what do you think are the best ways to talk to your audience and to get that information back from them?
Yeah. So, I mean, you just gave one of my answers right in your question, which is talk to your audience. So whether that's on a very one-on-one basis, or whether it's through, designing some kind of a poll or a survey, throwing it on your social media, doing it in a very low pressure kind of way. And I would also say, take what they say with a grain of salt. Like the famous Henry Ford quote is like, I asked people what they wanted and they said a faster horse, right? So they may want something that they think is going to be the better for them, but then that would have deprived us of like being able to drive. So listen to what they say, look for patterns, listen for what they're saying when they're not talking to you. So are you involved in communities where your audience hangs out, whether those are physical communities, you're actually in the same spaces, you're watching your kids play hockey and they happen to be your target audience, like have conversations with them. I also mean virtual spaces. Like if there are, there's all kinds of groups on LinkedIn. There are all kinds of Slack channels devoted to different communities where people have a shared interest. So hang out in those and eavesdrop. Facebook groups. Try to just see what people are talking about and go in with curiosity, ask questions. Reddit. My son is also always talking about using Reddit as a source of like maybe non-scientific, but interesting ideas, right? So it might give you some ways to take the temperature of people who are not answering and saying what they think you want to hear. They're just talking, and you're able to see what's coming up. So
yeah, I was actually on Reddit on our Calgary yesterday, and they had a whole thread about like what is the absolute worst place in all of Calgary, and it was super interesting. And I thought of my colleagues at City Magazines in Alberta. And they should be reading this thread because there's some gold here.
Brilliant. I feel a story idea coming on.
Yeah. The other thing about Reddit too, just to speak about like missing social promotion opportunities, is many brands have spaces now on Reddit where they post their content. So I mention that because if you're not looking at ways that you can tap into that audience that are having conversations about what you're writing, you ask the audience at the beginning or partway through to think about to have an exercise. Do you want to talk about that exercise a little bit?
Yeah, well, if there aren't any other questions, I had you had shared, or Kylie had shared, a few of the questions that came sort of at the outset of and I tried to, and they all were basically one question. So thank you for asking those. I hope that you came away with some ideas, and if there isn't anything else that anyone wants to ask, I'd love to go back to the idea of using any of these frameworks really to, for the editors in the group, because my my heart still lies on the idea of content creation. How would you use the jobs to be done framework or the elements of value to like plan an upcoming issue or plan an approach for a topic like, I talked about the never-ending train of potty training stories that we would constantly be throwing into the mix. How would you use those frameworks to revisit a topic that you have probably talked about a lot, but maybe your readers are changing because they always are? And how could you see using that one of those frameworks to help plan content or an approach or a newsletter or an event?
I like the idea of using it to reinvent an event approach. If you imagine your audience and the different journeys that they have through the space, like the real space or the virtual space of an event, and how might you adapt different elements of what you're delivering to create that next, so to take them up a level, right? From what they needed and networking to inspiration and beyond that.
Totally. And even, an event has various audiences, right? There's the people buying tickets. Maybe they're hoping for they have one set of jobs to be done. But then there are also people who are there to offer sponsorship or present or whatever. So it's like, what are the jobs to be done that would apply to them? And again, in those different tiers of the bingo card pyramid.
Yeah. I now people are throwing questions at me left and right. So if you would like to know, is it ever appropriate to talk about ourselves rather than our value to our audience? Since the answer is no, how do I dissuade my client who wants to do this? Oh,
Mifi, what a great question. I think I would, what I try to do is influence people to what I would do is try to understand their side. How is this working for you? Show me the data that this is working, that it's gaining you steady growth over time. And if they can't pony up that data, then I would invite them to consider another opportunity, which is to do it slightly differently and try it and see how it goes. And then it might be helpful to show them the difference in it. I realize now it might have been helpful for me to have brought that to you to show you the difference between, you know, a website that takes the conventional approach. We think this website is actually about us versus the website that is actually about the audience instead, to show you how they read very differently, and how they resonate completely differently. So that would be my suggestion there. It's a great conversation to have, because there's no question that the storytelling approach is way more effective.
Although I can tell you from my experience an hour and a half ago trying to buy a microphone, don't get so caught up in your brand story that you forget to answer the simple questions.
Totally.
I had a very simple question. I couldn't find it.
Excellent point. Yes. The functional stuff has to be there. The data has to be there, but don't forget about the opportunity to connect in different ways, because there's a lot of people selling microphones. And so, you know, what's so special about yours for me?
Put that newsletter sign up right at the top and let me know how I can get in touch with you. And read the email and answer is really important. Sylvia has a good question about kind of in-person reader stuff. So thoughts on a possible reader appreciation event. Is it a good or a bad idea?
Oh, I love that idea. I feel like people are hungry for connection, like in real life connection. We used to have, I'm trying to remember back in the day, we didn't have that many opportunities to connect with readers at Chatelaine, because everybody, it was, you know, I worked for national magazines, which had many great things about it. But one of the downsides was there was no it wasn't a community publication. So depending on the nature of your publication, framing something as a pop-up or like a tea, I don't know what the nature is of your magazine and what people are interested in there, but tying in something that they value and presenting it as an opportunity to connect and you know, nerd out on that. I don't know. I'd be very interested to see how that went.
Yeah, the feeling that I would have got before I got into magazines of being invited to participate in something by a magazine that I read would have been the moon. It would have been the moon.
That's a great point. People were very invested in the magazines that I worked at. And I mean, it never failed to make an impact on me when people, like, we would read every letter, like they would be passed around to everyone. And I always really enjoyed that part, like really understanding what makes them angry and disappointed. And for them to take the time to express that to you, it meant they really cared about what we were doing. And, you know, it helped me connect with that sense of greater purpose and that opportunity to be in service, which I think is what every magazine is ultimately about.